And in some cases, it's not going to be clear that one predominates over another. You might have, what I would call a tie between the 2 or 3 different components. And then the question is there a center that already has experience evaluating the kinds of safety and efficacy issues that the new product raises? And if nobody has experience with it, then the question is there a center that has evaluated products that raise similar safety and efficacy issues? At the end of the day, one center is going to take the lead, but I think as some of you have already experienced, FDA is going to make sure that it draws on whatever expertise it needs to draw on. So even though CDER might take the lead on a particular combination product, there are going to be folks from CDRH involved for the device aspects of the product. And then the last piece I'll touch on is both informal and formal determinations of jurisdiction are available, and if anybody wants to know more about those, we can talk afterward. If you haven't seen this chart available, it's available through a sort of an older publication called the CDER Handbook, and I included it just because I think this is a process that most of you all are probably familiar with. It's the traditional drug development pathway where you have your preclinical studies, then you have your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and the principal point I'll make is that for cosmetic products in particular, if we take new drugs, if this is the one end of the continuum, what you have to go through to get a new drug on the market, at the other end of the continuum, you would have a cosmetic product. A cosmetic manufacturer is not required to submit any information whatsoever about its product to FDA. As long as that manufacturer is willing to assume the burden of establishing that the product is safe, because on the back end, if there's a problem, they're going to be on the hook for the safety of that product. But as long as they've made that safety determination and they're comfortable that the product is safe for its intended use, they do not have to submit any information to FDA. They don't have to give any notice to FDA that they're going to put the product on the market. And with some exceptions, dietary supplements, it's kind of a similar issue. There is a category of dietary supplement ingredients that has to go through a pre-market notification process. But it's just a notification process. It's not an approval process. So it's a pretty big range in terms of the kind of hoops you have to go through to get one category of product as opposed to another on the market. And I don't mean to oversimplify it because sometimes you'll hear, in the press, they'll say, popular press will say dietary supplements aren't regulated or cosmetics aren't regulated. And that's not entirely accurate. They are regulated in the sense that FDA has authority to take an unsafe product off the market. There are standards that apply to those products. It's just that they're not the kinds of standards that are applied to drugs and devices. And I think folks in the supplement and cosmetic industries would say, well, for good reason, we have a long track record of, by and large, all of these products being safe for their intended uses. So what's the point of expending additional resources on reviewing safety pre-market? Where there is a fairly big difference, and I already alluded to it, is in the flow of information in that pre-market versus post-market category. By the time you get that drug to market, FDA has had its hooks in just about every possible aspect. With these other products, as I mentioned, FDA might not have received any information at all. So a number of nanotechnology products are already on the market, and I went ahead and included some examples here. I think you're all probably familiar with these. Abraxane, NanoOS has been featured in some presentations at these conferences. On the cosmetic front, you might be less familiar. Hydrozen, which is billed as a nano-encapsulated triceramide, so it's a moisturizing cream, that's the function. On the dietary supplement side, NanoBioSim, nano-sized diatomaceous earth for immune system support. That's the claimed function there. And then on the food packaging side, there's a lot of interest in the antimicrobial properties of silver and how you could impregnate packaging materials with nano-sized silver. But this is really just the tip of an iceberg. If you're not already familiar with it, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, has a project on emerging nanotechnologies. They have a website. They've been extremely active over the past few years in generating a wide range of papers that have looked at what FDA is doing on nano, what EPA is doing on nano, what the Consumer Product Safety Commission is doing on nano, making recommendations for the new administration. And one of the things that they have is an inventory. They routinely scour the marketplace and add products to the inventory in all the different categories: medical products, cosmetic, foods. And I think, I don't know what the latest figures are, but fairly recently, I think there were over 600 dietary supplement products on the marketplace that claimed to use nanotechnology. Now, it's not a perfect science because, who knows whether they really use nanotech ingredients or whether it's a marketing ploy. And the flip side of that coin is you could have a lot of products out there that use nanotechnology and have chosen not to market themselves that way, perhaps, for fear of liability issues. So just some examples. And I already touched on both of these points. So getting down to more specific examples, that's a pretty impressive example of a sunburn. But sunscreens are a drug product, and they fall into the category of OTC drugs, over-the-counter drugs. You might not be familiar with how those are regulated, but essentially, for the first several decades of drug regulation in the United States, FDA had authority over safety, but not over efficacy. So when FDA was finally given authority to look not just safety, but also efficacy, by that time there were already hundreds, if not thousands, of drug products on the market, and FDA had to figure out which ones were going to stay and which ones were going to go. And the only manageable way to do that was to invent this system out of whole cloth called the OTC monograph review. So an OTC monograph is basically FDA's recipe for a type of over-the-counter drug product. It gives you the ingredients that you're allowed to use. It gives you the indications that you're allowed to claim in the labeling of the product. And I think that's probably enough background for us to be able to go forward. Essentially, as long as you have met the requirements of the monograph that applies to your product, and if it's a sunscreen, as long as I'm using the listed ingredients, as long as I'm making the claims that are allowed, I can go straight to market, and I don't have to go through FDA. There is no pre-market. Essentially, the OTC monograph, that recipe functions as the pre-market approval. So there's been some safety concerns raised with sunscreen, and to give you an idea of how long it takes to implement a monograph, the sunscreen monograph is a good example. They started rulemaking on it in 1978, and you see some of the stops along the way. In 1993, a proposed tentative final monograph. 1999, a final monograph that they said would be effective in 2 years. 2001, when it was supposed to be effective, they stayed it. 2007, they put out a proposed amendment of the final monograph. So we're looking at, going on a 20-plus year history to get this thing finalized. Now, in the meantime, what happens to all those products that are on the market? I mean, technically, you could say that they're in violation of the law. So FDA's innovation is to say enforcement discretion. We're not going to take action against an OTC product until our review is complete, unless the product poses a potential health hazard to the consumer. And in 1999, where questions were being raised about this new ingredient being used, or I'll put new in quotation marks, new ingredient being used in some of these sunscreens, FDA referred to it as micronized titanium dioxide. I think it's before the term nano came into vogue. But FDA said it's not a new ingredient. It's instead a specific grade of titanium dioxide, and we're not seeing anything to indicate that there is a particular safety concern associated with this nano-sized silver. A number of outside observers thought that the data was not quite as robust as what FDA was claiming. And an example of the kind of pressure that can be brought to bear on the agency and the kind of publicity that can be delivered on an issue like this, the International Center for Technology Assessment, one of the watchdog groups in Washington, D.C., filed a citizen petition with FDA asking them to amend the sunscreen monograph to address these engineered nanoparticles.